Welcome to BCB Radio. This is Penny speaking at the Catalyst program, which is a monthly program that we hold talking about things that are local to Bradford and things that those of us who live, work and do stuff around Bradford would like to share. My name is Penny and I work at the Racial Justice Network, and I'm really excited because this month I've got two of my colleagues or peers, should I say, interviewing for the program, and on several things, but mainly about a report that was launched yesterday on the police use of biometric fingerprints machines. Those of us or those within, like the listeners who've been following either RJN or who've listened to a few of the programs that we've run on BCB are aware that we've spoken about this, and we've been running this campaign now for nearly 3 years, having started as concerns of this technology that was introduced and the impact it's had or likely to have on Black, Brown and migrant communities and also poor communities. So in the last few months, there's been reports that there was a report launched earlier this year telling about the same thing in terms of public perception. So people were introduced or who were asked to participate in the interviews and who shared the perspective on what they thought, which was published early in the year. So this year, or this week actually, we've had the second report, which you'll be hearing more about now wider than just West Yorkshire. This is national data on what's been happening and what's coming out of the data that's been collected. So as I said, I'm excited because I've got two of my colleagues, Sharon Anyam and Laura Loyola Hernandez with us. So I'm going to invite you, Laura, to start us off and tell us what's happening or what's been happening, and also about this report. And then Sharon, you can bounce back in and we can do the back and forth as we do. Welcome, Laura.
Hi, thank you, Penny, for having us, and hi to Sharon as well. So this report, which is being co-launched with Queen Mary University London, is based on freedom of information requests that we did last year to all police forces. So there are 45 police forces and 3 special task force. And what we got as a result is basically saying what we have been saying since the launch of Stop the Scan. The national data shows that of the racial data that we got from the police forces, that there is disproportionate use of the scanner on racially minoritized individuals. For example, for every 10,000 white person stopped, there is 48 Arabic people being stopped and scanned. This is similar for Black residents that are scanned for every white North European. 14 Asian people are stopped for every white person, almost 4 Chinese people, 2 South Asian people, and again, 48 Arabic people are stopped and scanned for every white person. So we can definitely see there is racial profiling in the Stop the Scan. Out of the freedom of information request that we made, 17 forces refused or did not respond to them. But of the data that we got, as I said, I think the most important part is A, that there's disproportionate use on racially minoritized individuals, that England is the only country in the UK currently deploying these scanners and this technology very hastily without any public consultation. We know that there are a couple of police forces that in Wales that did a pilot scheme, but then they refused to continue. We know that North Wales Police emphatically said that they would not be using the mobile fingerprint scanning devices. And Police Scotland said that they had serious ethical and legal concerns, and therefore they would not be deploying the scanners as well. So we can sort of see that what we are asking, which is basically for police to stop using the scanners, or until that comes, that a firewall be installed between immigration and the police be installed. So we know that there are police forces in the UK that have said that they were not going to be using them. So we know that this is a viable solution, and we urge police forces in England to also do the same way.
Thank you, Laura. And I think this point that you're making, we've been saying this for quite a while, and the fact that you've now got data to match the concerns and the whole reason behind the campaign is quite concerning. Sharon, I know, you've been part of, again, not just a project officer, but part of the organizers who've been, behind working on these campaigns. And you've also contributed in different ways, even to this report itself. What were your things? Because I know we've all kind of seen some of the recommendations and the findings, some of which Laura has just mentioned. What was your thought on it as well?
Yeah, hi, Penny, and hi, Laura. Hi for me and Baby Justice, because she might also join me to explain sort of our thoughts towards it. But I think that this new report that's coming out is it's a very, very powerful one, because I feel like it confirmed a lot of the things that we already had, like we had suspicions of from the very start of the campaign. So as Laura sort of highlighted the figures of how it's been disproportionately used, this was our fear. And this fear that it's going to be disproportionately used didn't stem from nowhere. It stemmed from what we see and what we hear from our communities and what people in our communities are telling us. So as we had seen previously with the stop and search and how they were disproportionately used to target Black and brown communities, I think we know that now, and it's there in the black and white data that this is happening. So in one way, it's a powerful report, because it really does sort of show that, and it really uses those figures to sort of highlight the unethical uses of these devices and how it could, create and lead to a potential another scandal just waiting. However, I think it's also quite sad and also quite disappointing to see that we were asking these questions almost 3 years ago. We were looking for answers because we had these sort of suspicions, and it almost felt like, the different people that we tried to talk to, the ex-PCC of West Yorkshire, other people that we reached out to, it almost felt like, we weren't really being heard out, and they didn't share the same concerns potentially. So I'm hoping with this new report that they can also see why we have concerns and how this is going to impact our community. And, hopefully we can get those devices stop being used.
Yeah, no, certainly. And maybe just it's worth perhaps just kind of mentioning it's been a long 3 years, having started with just a couple of people and then grown. What's your thoughts on the efforts that it's taken, but also the collaboration aspect of this? I know, Laura, you just mentioned Queen Mary University, but you're also involved in the campaign with the rest of the organizers and have been for quite a while now. What's your thoughts on, because obviously this is concerning and worrying, but in terms of the solidarity that you've seen, is there anything, worth sharing with our listeners?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I think we've seen over the past weeks how solidarity and community and grassroots mobilizing can have a huge effect. For example, we saw the raids happening in Glasgow, and how, from a community standpoint, people reacted very quickly, and they stopped two people from being detained and taken to an immigration center. So we can see, that's kind of like the extreme of like community solidarity, but we can also see it. I hope that people will feel inspired and continue to support organizations like RJN, like Yorkshire Resist, and many other local groups that have been talking about how migrants particularly are affected by these technologies, by hostile environment, particularly from Black and Brown communities. And that, it's not just to say, well, if I'm not a migrant, that's not going to affect me. It's something that affects all of us, whether you're a migrant, whether, you're from a racially minoritized community, this sharing of data and this normalization of surveillance technology. We can see it, for example, with the Kill the Bill protests that have been mobilizing over the past couple of months, and the connection that they're trying to curtail our rights to protest, and who are most affected by that. Lower income communities, the Roma traveler, gypsy communities, migrants, Black and Brown communities. So it's important that solidarity, those moments of solidarity that can happen, whether that's, putting your bike under a van to stop an immigration raid, sharing stuff on social media, or getting involved and using what little or a lot of privilege you have or platforms to share what is already happening, because collective action is resistance, and we need more to stand up with people that don't have that platform, because it's not that they're not talking, it's not that these communities are not speaking, it's just that they're not being heard.
That's a really good point. I think, in our involvement, we said about unheard or voiceless. It's not that people are not, they are, it's just that they're not heard. But I want to go back to and come back to Sharon on that point, that really good point that Laura mentioned, of normalization of not just policing, but the level of intrusiveness that has come with it. There's been talk about people feeling protected, and whether safety is particularly around policing. And we've been involved, as you know, in spaces where we say not everybody feels safe. And I know, again, late last year, there was a report on hate crime and systemic injustice that the Racial Justice presented, which was also highlighting some of these factors of what it is, what it means when racially minoritized communities are victims or witnesses to crime, and how, whether they come forward or don't, and how that relates to not just, or when the perpetrators as well, but how that relates to the hostile environment. So Sharon, I know, as I said, we've been in spaces where we're talking about that, but what's your particular take on safety or the safety? Some people feel safe, some people don't, and what's your explanation for that? Because I think this is not always discussed widely, and people assume some people hate the police or don't want to work with the police without looking into the historical aspects of it.
No, I think that is a really important point. I was going to add to even what Laura was saying around solidarity. So I'll sort of connect the 2 points. So I think one of the things like this work and that we're doing, and the campaign itself, there's been at times where it's felt quite bleak. When we've seen the data, when we've spoken to people, when we've worked with communities, where we've heard what's going on, and sort of the need for the campaign. At times it has been quite bleak, and it has been quite emotionally exhausting, emotionally tiring, and at times been one of the laws, as well as organizations that are interested in, that also have a vested interest in sort of the work that we're doing. However, I think it's really important that we do speak to this idea of sort of safety and who feels safe and the spaces that we have to be in. I think a lot of the time with the campaign, there's spaces that we have to sit in where, not everyone in the room, is safe, because there's people in the room who might potentially, not as individuals, but with the organizations and networks, they're all just showing up. I know myself and Penny recently went to a protest, and it was really important to acknowledge that protest, the people who couldn't be there, because, a lot of us, like Laura said, we do want to, are talking, a lot of us want to have our voices heard, but it's not always safe for a lot of us to be in spaces where our voices can be heard, and there's not always spaces created for people to have their voices being heard. So I think one of the campaign, and one of our, the reasons for our recommendations is so that we can have spaces for people from migrant communities and people who are seeking asylum to feel heard and, you know, to feel.
Yeah, Sharon, I know you had moments of where we could hear you very well, and then moments where we couldn't hear you very well, but I think we captured, hopefully our listeners also captured quite a bit of that. And I know we're going to move on to other things that either just not just related to this work and this focus on the technology and racially minoritized communities and what this data has shown, but perhaps it'd be good to maybe mention, obviously you've mentioned a few of the key findings, but some of the recommendations, Laura, if you could just, a few for people to hear.
Yes, of course. So I think, you know, our reports reflects what the campaign has been saying for the past 3 years. And I think we have to see the recommendations in different levels. So one of the immediate actions that we're asking is a firewall be installed between the police and the immigration database, because as the report shows, these devices are being used to stop and scan and detain people for immigration offenses. For example, Kent Police has the highest record of stop and scan for immigration offenses, with 17 leading to arrest. So that's kind of like one of the immediate actions that we're asking for. Another thing is that the scan, like this technology needs to be stopped immediately being used across police forces in England until an equality assessment impact is done, until the public has a say in whether they want to use this technology. And our report that we launched in January on the public's perception, we did a national survey, and in that survey, we found that 96% of the respondents oppose the use of this technology in general, and a very high number also agreed that it just allows police to do more of racial profiling. So it's not that all of a sudden, you know, there's institutional racism in the police and therefore they're using this technology. That already exists, but they're using this technology to sort of continue this institutional racism. I think one of our immediate concerns and recommendations also is that we need funding for community organizers, individuals, community advocate groups, grassroots organizations who are doing the work, who are doing the invisibilized, a lot of the times unpaid and unrecognized labor of supporting particularly Black and Brown migrant communities or individuals who have been victims of hate crime or other types of crime as well. But I think part of our recommendations in the long run is that we have to ask for radical change. And part of that radical change is calling for an end to hostile environment policies, because we know that these policies disproportionately affect Black and Brown migrant communities and are putting lives at stake. These are human beings, these are not numbers, and we need to come in as a community in solidarity, you know, to fight this hostile environment.
Thank you so much for that. And I think it's just again worth reminding our listeners, I think as Bradford being one of the really diverse places and communities, therefore the impact or the likely impact of some of these technologies it's kind of felt more. So as you say, it's not just numbers, it's humans, it's neighbors, it's friends, it's people's kids, it's kids, friends, it's all of those things that have really dire consequences that are often again hidden. But the example you gave of what we saw of Glasgow, and we know the anti-raids networks exist, it shows that when communities really wake up to it, because a lot of this stuff has been done, whether it's the raids, it's the detention, happens hidden, and the ones who are fighting it are also not just the burden, the emotional burden, but also sometimes the financial burden that comes with it means it's not always public, and the shame as well, it's not always public. So people don't go, for example, to mainstream media and go, hey, my brother's been detained. It's kind of always hidden. So And for me, it takes it back also around the history, not just of colonialism or colonial legacies and why people continue to migrate, why people are seeking sanctuary, but also what they're escaping from and what are the sources of those things, but also the idea of borders. What are borders and what are they for? Sharon, I think maybe, and I know I said we'll probably try and turn it a bit not positive, and it's not to water down all of what that's been shared, but there is a bit of what Laura's just mentioned about the work and the labor, the invisible labor that goes on to communities who are harmed, communities who fear authorities, communities who continue to just kind of hide behind because the authorities to them are a threat. And the people they rely on are small groups, grassroots groups, community advocates. So I'd be interested to invite you in to kind of share a little bit, because we've got other reports. So we've got this report that came out yesterday. We've got another report that's coming out in July around what the Racial Justice Network did around COVID in Bradford, Halifax, Leeds, and other communities, including Wakefield in West Yorkshire. So I should say, yeah, I should invite you here to say, like, okay, despite all of these things that are happening, and we know and we understand what COVID has brought to the surface, that there are groups and things that are happening behind the scenes that are doing amazing work. Would you care to tell us a little bit more, Sharon?
Yeah, sure. I think it's always important, because I think this is something that we always like put in the front of our minds to do, to celebrate the people who help sort of with the work that we do. So I think my connection's a bit unstable, so I hope you're catching what I'm saying, but feel free to let me know if you're not. But yeah, it's really important to celebrate that. One of our groups that we have is our community advocates who work closely through the lockdown period to work to see how we could help them support the communities that they were supporting during the time of the lockdown period. And there have been a group that has been just really helpful and that have been really useful and are really important to celebrate. So we have a report coming out about sort of the community's response to COVID and the lockdown situation. And also we're having an event in July just to also celebrate them and celebrate all the hard work that they do in our community, rarely ever get recognized outwardly. And, you know, this can lead to problems sustaining the work they do or even getting resources to them. So it's really important that we, you know, really share in so that we're recognizing where the resources and our efforts when we are speaking about these things and the things that need to get done, we remember the communities that we're doing it for.
Yeah, I'll invite Laura to share a little bit more, because I think the journey before and all of what we were doing last year, and I think some of that what I think shared to our listeners on BCB when we were fundraising and stuff. But yeah, Laura, could you share a bit more?
Yeah, so this campaign that we launched in April of last year was a direct response of talking to the communities, particularly undocumented refugee and asylum communities in West Yorkshire. And, you know, the digital divide was very much present, but beyond that, people's mental health was having a very big impact. A lot of people were being re-traumatized by lockdown and having to experience being secluded, people fleeing war, etc. So one of the first, I guess, stage of the campaign was to get resources to the community. So whether that was digital devices, which we continue to do today, we also crowdsourced face masks as well, because not everyone can afford that. We also did, we got donations and material and money as well. So we got a lot of toys, books, activity books for adults and children, toys, gardening, knitting stuff. But that was just the first stage. We really wanted to go beyond that and build that network across West Yorkshire of these communities supporting each other, of connecting with each other, and building up this network so that they can with their voices again, because it's not that they're not speaking, it's just they're not being let into the rooms to speak. So what we want to do, or wanted to do and continue to do, is have community advocate meetings to build that network. And of that came this report that we will be launching in July, not only as a celebration of resisting, you know, a hostile environment, racism, but celebrating what these communities did with very little to no resources. A clear example, very quickly, that they did was the track and trace app from the NHS that we were all, you know, told to download and to self-isolate and whatnot. First of all, that requires you to have a smartphone and to have data to be able to download the app, but also to understand the language and what you need to do. Whereas some of the communities that we were working basically created their own test system, what they called it, and you can read more on our RJN blog about that. But it was basically, they invented their own track and trace system where if they had COVID symptoms, they would get tested, and then they would message their friends that they had been in contact with and ask them to self-isolate. At the same time, someone within the community would bring them food or you know, medicine or anything that they needed, or just to have someone to check up on you. So again, we see that with very, very little resources and recognition, communities are the report that will be launched in July.
Oh God, that was just a typical thing that it kicked me out, and I'm supposed to be like the host, and it says my internet is unstable. I thought Sharon's was bad. But yeah, I got the end bit of what you were sharing there of how communities responded, the resilience, the innovation, the resourcefulness around COVID, despite of all the other factors of like the inequality, whether it's health and the hostile environment, amongst other things. So thank you for that summary. I'm gonna, I don't know whether Sharon's still with us, probably not. I wanted to ask the dates for when this is happening, and also for the event, because we've got the event launching the report from yesterday, when that date is and where people can find that information, as well as the potential dates for the report in July and when we're going to have that event, which obviously is going to be, we're going to invite other people. Could you give us that just as an endpoint?
Yeah, so people can log on to www.racialjusticenetwork.co.uk and you can download the report there. There's also a 3-minute video explaining our major findings. You can catch us on Twitter at Race Justice, or on Instagram at the Racial Justice Network. And just keep a lookout. We will have a launch event for the report on June 17th, and we'll have members from different communities that are affected not only by this report, but we're going to have wider conversations. Advocates also in July, so keep a lookout on our social media and on our website, and you can look for the information there as well.
Thank you so much, Laura, and also for persevering despite all the technical issues. Hopefully it won't be too unclear for our listeners. I know you've got another meeting you're heading off to, so thank you. And thank you to Sharon. I'll probably contact Sharon after this just to let her know. Yeah, so as Laura said, like, keep a lookout for the report. I think some people who are linked to that probably already have seen it, but yeah. So this has been Catalyst at BCB Radio. Thank you and have a good evening.